This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. As she gave me a quick tour, I noticed how run down everything looked. Peeling paint, flickering lights, an overall sense of neglect. When we reached the patient wing, a chill ran down my spine. The long, dimly lit hallway stretched out before me, lined with heavy metal doors. Muffled sounds came from behind some of them, mumbling, soft crying, occasional outbursts. "You'll be responsible for hourly checks on the patients in this wing," the administrator explained. "Most are heavily medicated and sleep through the night, but a few can be restless. Just stick to the routine and you'll be fine." She introduced me to the other night nurse, an older woman named Gladys, before heading out. Gladys barely looked up from her magazine as she grunted a hello. Great, I thought. Looks like I'm on my own tonight. The first few hours passed uneventfully as I made my rounds, checking on sleeping patients and updating charts. Around 2 a.m., I was at the nurse's station when I heard shuffling footsteps approaching. I looked up to see an elderly man in a bathrobe standing there, his white hair wild and unkempt. "Can I help you, sir?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. He leaned in close, his rheumy eyes wide. "They're coming," he whispered urgently. "I can hear them in the walls. We have to get out of here." I recognized him as Mr. Thompson from my patient files, late-stage dementia, prone to delusions. "It's all right, Mr. Thompson," I said soothingly. "You're safe here. Let's get you back to bed." But he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "No, you don't understand. They're in the basement. I've seen them, heard them. We're all in danger." A chill ran through me at his words. I gently pried his fingers from my arm. "How about we take a little walk? Clear your head a bit?" He nodded frantically. Yes, but we must be quiet. They'll hear us." I led him down the hall, planning to circle back to his room. But as we passed a door marked Basement Access, he stopped abruptly. "Listen," he hissed. "Can't you hear them?" I paused, humoring him, and that's when I heard it, a faint whisper, almost below the threshold of hearing. I shook my head, telling myself it was just pipes or the wind, but Mr. Thompson's eyes were wild with fear. "They're awake," he moaned. "God help us all." Before I could stop him, he wrenched open the basement door and hurried down the stairs. Cursing under my breath, I followed him. The temperature seemed to drop with each step into the gloom. At the bottom, I fumbled for a light switch. A single bare bulb flickered to life, casting deep shadows across the cluttered space. Old furniture and boxes were piled haphazardly. The musty smell of damp and decay filled my nostrils. "Mr. Thompson?" I called softly. "Where are you?" A scuffling sound came from behind a tall wardrobe. I cautiously made my way over, my heart pounding. "Come on out now. It's time to go back upstairs." I peered around the edge of the wardrobe. Mr. Thompson was crouched in the corner, rocking back and forth. But it wasn't him that made my blood run cold. In the shadows beyond him, I saw something. A dark figure, blacker than the surrounding gloom. As my eyes struggled to focus on it, it seemed to shift and writhe, as if not fully solid. I blinked hard, sure I was seeing things. When I looked again, it was gone. But the sensation of a malevolent presence lingered. Mr. Thompson looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "You saw it, didn't you?" he whispered. "Now you know. They're coming for us all." I helped him to his feet, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Let's go back upstairs now," I managed to say. As we climbed the stairs, that faint whispering seemed to follow us. I resisted the urge to look back, focusing instead on getting us out of there as quickly as possible. Once we were back in the patient wing, I got Mr. Thompson settled in his room. But even after I closed his door, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The rest of my shift passed in a haze of anxiety. Every shadow, every odd noise set my nerves on edge. When morning finally came, I practically ran out of that place. I called the administrator as soon as I got home and quit on the spot. She seemed unsurprised, even resigned, as if she'd been expecting it. I still don't know what I saw that night. I've tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, fueled by an old man's paranoid ramblings. But in my darkest moments, I remember that shadowy figure. And sometimes, when the house is quiet, I swear I can still hear those whispers. I pulled up to the address and grabbed the pasta order from my insulated bag. As I walked up to the front door, I noticed the porch light was off, which was a bit odd. I rang the doorbell, and a man answered pretty quickly. He looked to be in his mid-30s, average height and build. Nothing really stood out about him. "Hi there, delivery for Mark?" I said, glancing down at the receipt. "That's me," he replied with a slight smile. I handed over the food, and he passed me a cash tip. As I turned to leave, I felt his eyes on me. It was an uncomfortable sensation, like he was staring a bit too intently. I shrugged it off and headed back to my car. People can be weird sometimes, I figured. A couple days later, I got a notification that someone had followed me on Instagram. I didn't recognize the username, but when I checked the profile, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of that same guy from the delivery. His bio said Mark and listed his location as Portland. How the hell did he find me? My Instagram isn't connected to my work at all. I quickly blocked the account, feeling unsettled. Later that night, I got a Facebook friend request from a Mark Johnson. Same guy, different platform. I denied it and blocked him there too. Now I was seriously creeped out. This guy was clearly searching for me online. The next day, my phone buzzed with a LinkedIn connection request. Yep, you guessed it, Mark again. At this point, I was seriously freaked out. I called my brother Tom in a panic. "Dude, this is not normal," Tom said after I explained the situation. "Have you gotten any messages from him?" Just then, my phone dinged. A DM request on Twitter. With shaking hands, I opened it. "Jake, I've been thinking about you since you delivered my food. I'd love to get to know you better. Maybe we could grab a coffee sometime." I felt sick to my stomach. "Tom, he just messaged me on Twitter. He wants to meet up." "Hell no," Tom replied firmly. "Block him everywhere. If he contacts you again, we're going to the police." I spent the next hour locking down all my social media accounts and changing my privacy settings. But the damage was already done. This guy knew way too much about me. The next few days were tense. I jumped every time my phone buzzed. I kept looking over my shoulder during my delivery shifts, half expecting to see Mark's face staring back at me. On Friday night, I was out doing deliveries when I noticed a car that seemed to be following me. It was hard to tell in the dark, but it looked like it had been behind me for the last few turns. My heart started racing. Was it just paranoia? Or was Mark actually tailing me now? I took a series of random turns to see if the car would keep following. Sure enough, it stayed right behind me. Now I was in full-blown panic mode. I called Tom. "I think he's following me in his car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do I do?" "Where are you?" Tom asked, his voice tense. "I'm coming to meet you right now." I gave him my location, and Tom said he'd be there in 10 minutes. Those were the longest 10 minutes of my life. I kept driving aimlessly, watching the headlights behind me. Finally, I saw Tom's truck pull up beside me at a red light. "Pull over," he mouthed, gesturing to a nearby parking lot. I nodded and pulled in, Tom right behind me. The car that had been following me drove past slowly. In the glow of the streetlights, I caught a glimpse of the driver. It was definitely Mark. Tom came over to my car, his face grim. "Was that him?" I nodded, still shaken. "Yeah, that was definitely the guy." "All right, that's it," Tom said firmly. "You're done with deliveries for tonight. I'm coming with you on your shifts from now on until we get this sorted out." For the next week, Tom rode shotgun during all my delivery runs. It was comforting having him there, but I still felt on edge. Every time we passed a car that looked like Mark's, my heart would race. Then came the night that everything came to a head. We had just finished a delivery and stopped at a gas station to fill up. As I was pumping gas, I glanced across the lot and froze. There was Mark, filling up his own car and staring right at me. "Tom," I hissed urgently. "He's here." Tom's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing as he spotted Mark. "That's him? I'm going to go talk to this creep." I grabbed Tom's arm. "No, don't. Let's just go to the police station. We need to file a report." Tom looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. We got in the car and drove straight to the nearest precinct. My hands were shaking as I recounted the whole story to the officer at the desk. She took detailed notes and assured us they would investigate. "In the meantime," she said, "document everything. Save screenshots of any messages. If you see him following you again, don't confront him. Call 911 immediately." We left the station feeling a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. At least there was an official record now. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. For the next few weeks, I was constantly on high alert. Tom kept riding with me on deliveries. We didn't see Mark again, but I still felt like I was being watched. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. No more social media requests, no more sightings. Mark seemed to have vanished into thin air. It's been a few months now, and there's been no sign of him. But I'm still looking over my shoulder. I'm much more cautious about my online presence, and I'm hyper-aware of my surroundings during deliveries. This whole experience has been a stark reminder of how vulnerable we can be, even doing something as mundane as delivering food. I'm grateful it didn't escalate further, but the fear and stress of those weeks have left their mark. I don't think I'll ever feel quite as carefree on the job again. Sometimes I wonder what made Mark fixate on me. Was it just random, or was there something specific that caught his attention? I'll probably never know, and honestly, I don't want to. I'm just glad it's over, and I hope I never see or hear from Mark again. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's to trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And don't be afraid to ask for help or go to the authorities. This could have gotten so much worse if I hadn't reached out to Tom and the police. To anyone else out there in the service industry, especially delivery drivers, stay safe. You never know who's on the other side of that door. And to anyone who's experienced something similar, know that you're not alone. It's a terrifying thing to go through, but there is support out there. As for me, I'm still delivering food for now, but I'm looking into other job options. Something where I don't have to worry about obsessive customers tracking me down. This experience has definitely changed me, but I'm trying not to let it control my life. One day at a time, right? It was a Tuesday night around 10:30 p.m. I had just picked up an order from this burrito place downtown, 2 steak burritos and some chips. The delivery address was for one of those fancy gated communities on the outskirts of town. I've delivered there a bunch of times before, so I didn't think much of it. As I pulled up to the gate, I punched in the code the customer had given me. The gate slowly creaked open, and I drove in. It was eerily quiet. Most of the houses were dark, and there was hardly anyone around. I remember thinking it felt kind of creepy, but I brushed it off. I've done plenty of late-night deliveries before. I was about halfway to the customer's house when I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A black sedan was tailing me pretty closely. At first I figured it was just another resident coming home late, but something about it made me uneasy. The way they were following so close behind me, matching my every turn. My gut told me something was off. I tried to shake the feeling as I pulled up to the customer's house. I grabbed the food bag and got out, locking my car behind me. As I walked up to the front door, I heard car doors slamming shut. I glanced back and saw 2 men getting out of the black sedan, which had parked right behind my car. My heart started racing. Everything in me was screaming that this wasn't right. I quickly rang the doorbell, praying the customer would answer fast. But after a few seconds of silence, I realized no one was coming. I turned around, and the two men were walking towards me. One was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, while the other had on a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. They both looked to be in their 30s or 40s. "Hey man," the guy in the hoodie called out. "We're a little lost. Think you could give us a ride to the main road?" I clutched the food bag tightly, my palms sweating. "Sorry, I can't," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just here to drop off a delivery." The guy in the cap spoke up. "Come on, it'll only take a minute. We just need to get out of here." I shook my head. "I really can't. Sorry. I have other deliveries to make." I started walking back to my car, my legs feeling like jelly. But as I approached, I realized with horror that the black sedan was parked so close behind me that I couldn't open my driver's side door. The two men were right on my heels now. "Listen," the hooded one said, his tone suddenly aggressive. "You're going to give us a ride. Get in the passenger seat." My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. I fumbled with my keys, managing to unlock the car. "Please," I stammered. "I don't want any trouble. Just let me go." The guy in the cap grabbed my arm. "We're not asking. Get in the fucking car." In that moment, pure terror took over. I yanked my arm free and dove into the passenger seat, slamming and locking the door behind me. The men started pounding on the windows, yelling at me to open up. I scrambled across to the driver's seat, but I knew I was trapped. There wasn't enough room to pull out with their car blocking me in. My mind was racing, trying desperately to think of a way out. Then it hit me, the horn. I slammed my hand down on the steering wheel and just held it there. The loud, continuous honking shattered the quiet night. I prayed it would be enough to draw attention, to make these guys back off. The men were going berserk outside, cursing and threatening me. The guy in the hoodie started trying to break the passenger window with his elbow. I was certain that any second the glass would shatter and they'd drag me out. Just when I thought it was all over, I heard shouting in the distance. "Hey, what the hell is going on over there?" I looked up and saw a middle-aged man in a bathrobe standing on his front porch about 3 houses down, holding what looked like a baseball bat. The two men immediately backed away from my car. "Nothing, man, just a misunderstanding," the one in the cap called out. But the neighbor wasn't buying it. He started walking towards us, bat in hand. "I'm calling the cops right now if you don't get the hell out of here." I've never seen two people move so fast in my life. They practically dove into their sedan and peeled out of there, tires screeching. As soon as they were clear, I gunned it in the opposite direction, not even caring about the delivery anymore. I just needed to get out of there. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. I must have run at least 2 stop signs on my way out of that neighborhood. It wasn't until I was back on the main road that I finally let myself breathe. I called my boss as soon as I got home and told him what happened. He was super understanding and said I should take a few days off. I also filed a police report, but I doubt anything will come of it. I couldn't get a good look at the guys' faces, and I was too panicked to catch their license plate number. It's been a week, and I still get chills thinking about what could have happened if that neighbor hadn't shown up. I keep replaying it in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Should I have been more aware of my surroundings? Should I have just driven away as soon as I saw them following me? I've started carrying pepper spray now, and I'm way more cautious about late-night deliveries. Part of me wants to quit altogether, but I need the money. I guess I'm sharing this as a warning to other delivery drivers out there. Always trust your gut and never let your guard down, even in nice neighborhoods. I still don't know what those guys wanted. Were they planning to rob me, carjack me, something worse? I try not to think about it too much, but it's hard not to. I'm just grateful I made it out of there in one piece. But I know it'll be a long time before I feel truly safe doing this job again. The bell above the door jingled, making me jump. I looked up to see a man stumble in, looking disheveled and exhausted. My first instinct was annoyance. We were clearly closed. The sign was turned and everything. but something about his demeanor made me pause. "Sir, I'm sorry, but we're closed for the night," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He ignored me, shuffling towards the counter and slumping onto a stool. Up close, I could see his eyes were bloodshot and his clothes were stained. The smell of alcohol hit me, and I took an involuntary step back. "Just need a coffee," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. Against my better judgment, I decided to humor him. Maybe a cup of coffee would sober him up enough to leave without incident. I turned to grab the coffee pot, my back to him for just a moment. That's when everything changed. I heard a scraping sound behind me and whirled around to see the man standing now, a switchblade in his trembling hand. My blood ran cold as I realized how badly I had misjudged the situation. "Open the register," he growled, his voice low and menacing. My mind raced. The day's cash was already in the safe, which I couldn't open even if I wanted to, but I didn't think explaining that would go over well. "Sir, please," I started, my voice shaking. "We don't keep much cash on hand. It's all been—" He slammed his fist on the counter, making me flinch. "I said open it, now!" I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get them in the lock. The register popped open with a cheerful ding that felt absurdly out of place. He shoved me aside roughly and started grabbing the meager bills inside. I stumbled back, my hip hitting the edge of the prep counter. Pain shot through me, but adrenaline kept me on my feet. As he stuffed the money in his pockets, his eyes darted around wildly. "Where's the rest? I know you got more stashed somewhere." "That's all there is, I swear," I pleaded, tears starting to form. "Please just take it and go." He advanced on me, brandishing the knife. "Don't lie to me, bitch. Where's the safe?" I backed away, my hands raised. I can't open it. It's on a time lock. Only the owner can." "Bullshit," he roared, lunging forward. I screamed and ducked, feeling the wind of the blade as it swung over my head. I scrambled towards the kitchen, desperate for some kind of weapon to defend myself. He was right behind me, grabbing at my shirt. I felt the fabric tear as I wrenched away, darting behind the grill. My eyes landed on the heavy cast-iron skillet hanging nearby. I grabbed it just as he rounded the corner. "Stay back!" I yelled, wielding the skillet like a shield. He hesitated for a moment, clearly not expecting resistance. That split second was all I needed. I hurled the skillet at him with all my might and bolted for the back door. I heard him curse as the skillet connected, but I didn't look back. My fingers fumbled with the deadbolt, precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to unlock it. Finally, it gave way, and I burst out into the alley behind the diner. The cool night air hit my face as I ran, my feet pounding on the pavement. I had no plan, no destination in mind, just an overwhelming need to put as much distance between myself and that madman as possible. I don't know how long I ran. My lungs were burning, my legs felt like jelly, but the fear kept me going, imagining him right behind me, knife raised. Finally, I spotted a 24-hour convenience store up ahead, its fluorescent lights a beacon of hope. I burst through the doors, startling the bored-looking clerk behind the counter. "Please," I gasped, "call the police. There's a man. He tried to rob the diner. He has a knife." The clerk's eyes widened, and he quickly grabbed the phone. As he dialed 911, I collapsed against the counter, my legs finally giving out. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me shaky and nauseous. It felt like an eternity before I heard sirens approaching. 2 police cars pulled up outside, and officers rushed in. I gave them a breathless account of what happened, watching as they radioed for backup to check out the diner. One of the officers stayed with me while his partner went to investigate. He tried to calm me down, asking for more details about the attacker, but all I could think about was how close I'd come to. I couldn't even finish the thought. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, the radio crackled to life. They'd found him, still at the diner. He'd apparently passed out in the kitchen, surrounded by empty liquor bottles he'd raided from the bar. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The reality of what had happened began to sink in. My safe little diner, the place I'd worked for years, had become a crime scene. The thought of going back there made me physically ill. The next few days passed in a blur, giving statements to detectives, dealing with insurance claims, trying to reassure my shaken staff. I couldn't bring myself to reopen right away. The thought of being there alone again was too much to bear. It took weeks before I could step foot in the diner without having a panic attack. Even then, I jumped at every little noise, constantly looking over my shoulder. I installed new security cameras, better locks, a panic button under the counter, but it wasn't enough to make me feel truly safe again. I started closing earlier, making sure there were always at least 2 people on staff until the doors were locked. I became hyper-vigilant about unfamiliar faces, scrutinizing every customer who walked through the door. My employees noticed the change in me. Gone was the easygoing boss they'd known. In her place was a nervous, jumpy woman who flinched at sudden movements and triple-checked the locks. I tried to explain it to them, to make them understand the need for all the new security measures. But how could I convey the sheer terror of that night? The feeling of utter helplessness as a stranger threatened my life over a few $100s in the till. Nightmares plagued me for months. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I could hear the jingle of the bell above the door. Sometimes in my dreams, I wasn't fast enough. I'd feel the bite of the knife, see my own blood pooling on the checkered floor. Even now, years later, I'm not the same person I was before that night. The carefree small-town diner owner is gone, replaced by someone always looking over her shoulder, always prepared for the worst. I still run the diner. I couldn't let him take that from me too, but it's different now. There's a heaviness in the air, an undercurrent of tension that wasn't there before. My regulars have noticed, though they're too polite to say anything. They just give me sad, understanding smiles when I start at a loud noise or peer suspiciously at unfamiliar faces. I've thought about selling the place, starting fresh somewhere else, but this diner was my dream, my life's work. I can't let one horrible night destroy everything I've built, so I stay, I adapt, I survive. But I'll never forget that night. The night my quiet little diner became a waking nightmare. The night I learned that safety is an illusion, that danger can walk through your door at any moment. Sometimes, in the quiet moments before opening or after closing, I can still hear the echo of that bell jingling, and for a split second, I'm back there, facing down a desperate man with a knife, wondering if I'll make it out alive. They say time heals all wounds, but some scars run too deep, leaving marks that never truly fade. My diner still stands, still serves the best coffee and pie in town. But for me, it will always be the place where my sense of security shattered like a fallen plate on that terrifying night. It was just another late shift at the diner near campus. I've been working there for months to keep my old Honda running and chip away at my tuition. Usually, it's pretty uneventful, just your typical drunk college kid stumbling in for greasy food at 2 a.m. But that night was different. I first noticed him around 11 p.m. He sat alone in a booth, nursing a cup of coffee. Nothing unusual about that, except for the way he kept staring at me. Not just glancing, but full-on staring. Every time I looked up from wiping tables or refilling drinks, his eyes were locked on me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as the night wore on, the pit in my stomach grew. He barely touched his coffee, just sat there for hours, watching my every move. Around 1 a.m. when I went to refill his cup, he started asking questions. Innocent enough at first, how long I'd worked there, if I was a student. But then they got weirdly specific. What time did my shift end? What kind of car did I drive? Where did I live? I gave vague answers, trying to be polite but distant. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely pour the coffee. I wanted to tell my manager, but I felt stupid. The guy hadn't actually done anything wrong. Maybe I was overreacting. By the time my shift ended at 3 a.m., I was a nervous wreck. I practically ran to my car, fumbling with my keys. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I saw headlights flick on behind me. It was an ordinary sedan, nothing remarkable. But somehow, I knew it was him. I tried to convince myself I was being ridiculous. Lots of people leave bars and diners at 3 a.m., right? But as I drove, taking random turns through empty streets, the car stayed right behind me. Close enough to make me nervous, but not so close it was obvious. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I took a sharp right turn without signaling, and the car behind me did the same. That's when I knew for sure. He was following me. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't go home. What if he found out where I lived? I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone's following me, but they haven't actually done anything. I decided to test it one more time. I pulled into a 24-hour gas station, circling around the pumps before heading back out. Sure enough, the sedan followed my exact path, never stopping. Panic set in. I started driving faster, taking random turns, trying to lose him. But no matter what I did, those headlights stayed right behind me. I ran red lights, made illegal U-turns, anything to shake him off. But he matched my every move. I was full-on sobbing at this point, barely able to see the road through my tears. I had no idea where I was anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't stop, couldn't let him catch me. That's when I remembered the police station. It was on the other side of town, but it was my only hope. I took a deep breath and floored it, praying I remembered the way. The drive felt like it took hours. Every second I expected to feel his car ram into mine, to see him pull up beside me with a gun. My hands were sweating so bad I could barely hold the wheel. Finally, I saw the police station up ahead. I screeched into the parking lot, tires squealing. As I threw the car into park, I looked in my rearview mirror. The sedan slowed down as it approached the station, then suddenly made a U-turn and sped off into the night. I collapsed over the steering wheel, sobbing uncontrollably. A concerned officer came out to check on me. Through my tears, I managed to explain what happened. They took my statement, but without a license plate or clear description, there wasn't much they could do. It's been weeks, and they still haven't found the guy. I've switched to day shifts at the diner, but I can't shake the feeling that he's out there, watching, waiting. I check my rearview mirror constantly when I drive. I've installed new locks on all my doors and windows. I jump at every little noise. The worst part is, I don't know why. Why me? What did he want? The not knowing is almost worse than the fear. Was it just a sick game to him? Or did he have something much worse planned? I keep replaying that night in my head, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Should I have confronted him in the diner? Called the police earlier? What if I hadn't made it to the station? My friends tell me I need to move on, that I'm safe now. But they don't understand. How can I feel safe when I know there's someone out there who hunted me like prey? Someone who knows what I look like, where I work, what car I drive. I'm trying to get back to normal life, but it's hard. I flinch every time a car pulls up behind me at a stoplight. I can't sit with my back to the door in restaurants anymore. I've started taking self-defense classes, but I'm not sure it's helping. How do you defend yourself against a threat you can't see coming? The police say there haven't been any similar reports, which should make me feel better. But it doesn't, because that means he was targeting me specifically, and I have no idea why. I keep wondering if he'll come back. If one day I'll look up and see those eyes staring at me again. The anticipation is almost worse than the actual night it happened. At least then, I knew what I was dealing with. Now, every shadow could be him. I'm writing this partly to warn others, partly to try and process what happened. If you're reading this and you've experienced something similar, please know you're not alone. And if you haven't, please be aware of your surroundings. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again, but I'm trying. I'm in therapy now, working through the trauma. Some days are better than others. I'm learning to be more aware of my surroundings without letting the fear control me. But I'll never forget that night. The feeling of being hunted, of being completely alone and terrified. The realization that the world isn't as safe as I thought it was. That ordinary-looking people can have the darkest intentions. So if you're out there, working late shifts, driving home alone at night, be careful. Watch your surroundings. Trust your instincts. And if you ever feel like someone's following you, don't second-guess yourself. Get somewhere safe, call for help. Because you never know when an ordinary night can turn into your worst nightmare. It was around 11 p.m., and I was wiping down the counter when the phone rang. Nothing unusual there. We often get calls for takeout orders. I picked up with my usual cheerful greeting. "Rosie's Diner, how can I help you?" There was silence on the other end. Just as I was about to hang up, a man's voice came through, low and gravelly. "Are you alone?" he asked. A chill ran down my spine. "Excuse me?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I asked if you were alone," he repeated, his tone flat and emotionless. I slammed the phone down, my heart racing. It was probably just some creep, I told myself. No big deal. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that settled over me. About 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. Against my better judgment, I answered. The same voice. "Who else is there with you?" This time I didn't bother responding. I hung up immediately and tried to focus on my work. But my hands were shaking as I poured coffee for the few customers we had. The calls kept coming, every 15 to 20 minutes. Each time the questions got more specific, more unsettling. "What color shirt are you wearing? Did you lock the back door? That trucker in the corner booth, when did he come in?" I was terrified. How did he know these things? Was he watching me? I wanted to call the police, but what would I tell them? That some weirdo was asking me creepy questions. I had no proof, no threat of violence, just a gnawing fear in the pit of my stomach. Around 1 a.m. a man walked in and sat at the counter. There was something off about him from the start. He was dressed normally enough. Jeans, a dark jacket, baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. But he never looked up at me directly, and he kept fiddling with something in his pocket. I approached cautiously to take his order. "What can I get you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from trembling. He finally looked up, and his eyes sent ice through my veins. They were cold, calculating. A slight smirk played at the corners of his mouth. "Just coffee," he said. His voice was different from the one on the phone, but something about his demeanor made my skin crawl. As I turned to get his coffee, the phone rang again. I froze, looking back at the man. He was staring intently at me, that same unsettling smirk on his face. I let it ring, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. When I brought his coffee, he spoke again. "Aren't you going to answer that? It might be important." I mumbled something about it probably being a wrong number and retreated to the other end of the counter. The phone kept ringing, and the man's eyes never left me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I picked up the phone with a shaking hand. "Hello?" The gravelly voice was back. "I see you've met my friend. He says your hair looks nice tonight." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. The man at the counter chuckled softly, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast. That was it. I ran to the back office and called 911, my voice breaking as I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. They said they'd send a car right away. When I came back out, the man was gone. But he'd left something on the counter, a small flip phone and a pair of earbuds. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. The police arrived a few minutes later. They took my statement and looked around, but there wasn't much they could do. The man was long gone, and the phone he'd left behind was a burner. No way to trace it. I quit my job at the diner that night. I couldn't bear the thought of going back, of answering that phone again. For weeks afterward, I jumped every time my own phone rang. I installed new locks, got a security system, even moved to a new apartment. But none of it has helped shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that somewhere out there, that man is still waiting, still planning. Every time I see someone in a baseball cap, my heart races. Every unknown number that calls sends me into a panic. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again. The rational part of my brain tells me it was just some sick prank, that I'm overreacting. But late at night, when the house is quiet and dark, I can still hear that gravelly voice asking, "Are you alone?" I wish I could say there was some satisfying resolution, some explanation for what happened that night. But the truth is, I'm left with nothing but questions and a constant gnawing fear. Who were those men? What did they want? Why me? The police never found anything. The burner phone was a dead end, and the security cameras at the diner were too grainy to get a clear image of the man's face. It's like he appeared out of nowhere and vanished just as quickly. I've tried to move on, to convince myself it was just a random, terrifying occurrence. But deep down, I know better. The level of coordination, the specific knowledge they had about the diner and me, it couldn't have been random. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if it's really over. If one day I'll pick up my phone and hear that gravelly voice again. Or worse, turn around and see that cold-eyed man watching me. I've become a shadow of my former self. I used to be outgoing, confident. Now, I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, analyzing every stranger's face for a hint of recognition. I've lost friends who couldn't understand why I've changed so much, why I refuse to go out at night or answer calls from numbers I don't know. The worst part is the not knowing. If there had been some clear motive, some explanation, maybe I could process it and move on. But this formless, nameless terror, it's like a cancer that's eaten away at my sense of security, my trust in the world around me. I've seen therapists, joined support groups for victims of stalking and harassment. But how do you move past something you can't understand? How do you heal from a wound that has no clear edges? There are moments when I think I'm getting better, when I can go a whole day without reliving that night in my mind. But then something small will trigger me. A ringing phone, a man in a baseball cap, the smell of coffee, and I'm right back there, paralyzed with fear. I know this probably sounds paranoid. Hell, half the time I think I'm going crazy. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over. That somewhere out there, those men are laughing, planning their next move. And all I can do is wait, wondering if every day will be the day they decide to finish whatever game they started. So I live my life in a state of constant vigilance. I work from home now, have my groceries delivered, rarely go out except in broad daylight. It's not much of a life, but it's the only way I've found to cope with the lingering terror of that night. I'm sharing this story not because I expect anyone to solve the mystery or ease my fears. I'm sharing it as a warning. Be careful. Be aware of your surroundings. And if you ever pick up the phone and hear a gravelly voice ask, "Are you alone?" hang up immediately and run. Run far and fast, and pray they don't find you like they found me. Because once they do, you'll never feel truly safe again. Every shadow will hide a threat. Every phone call will carry the potential for terror. And you'll be left like me, jumping at every sound, questioning every stranger, and wondering if you'll ever reclaim the person you used to be. It was a slow evening, just a couple regulars nursing their coffees. Around 1 a.m., the place had cleared out completely. I was wiping down the counter for the 100th time when I heard a noise coming from the back. At first, I thought it was just the old pipes acting up again, but then I heard it more clearly, a sort of low mumbling sound. My first thought was that maybe one of our regulars had fallen asleep in a booth, so I did a quick walkthrough of the dining area. Empty. The noise was definitely coming from the restrooms. As I approached, my skin started to prickle. Something felt off. I called out, "Hello? Anyone in there?" No response, just more indistinct muttering. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the men's room door. The smell hit me first, a mix of sweat and something sour that made my nose wrinkle. And there, huddled in the corner by the sinks, was a man I'd never seen before. He was probably in his 40s, but it was hard to tell. His clothes were filthy and torn, his hair matted. He was rocking back and forth slightly, arms wrapped around his knees, staring at nothing. "Sir," I said cautiously, "the restaurant is closed. You can't stay in here." His head snapped up and I took an involuntary step back. His eyes were wild, bloodshot. For a moment he just stared at me, then he started speaking rapidly. "They're coming. They're always coming. Can't let them find me. Have to hide. Have to stay safe. You don't understand. No one understands. They're in the walls, in the air. Watching. Always watching." A chill ran down my spine. This guy was clearly not well. I tried to keep my voice calm as I said, "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave now. Do you need me to call someone for you?" He lurched to his feet suddenly, and I nearly bolted out the door, but he didn't come towards me. Instead, he pressed himself against the wall, fingers scrabbling at the tile. "No, can't leave. Not safe out there. They'll get me. You don't know what they can do, what they've already done. I've seen it. I know the truth." My heart was pounding. I needed to get this guy out of here, but I was scared to get any closer to him. He seemed to have forgotten I was there, muttering to himself and feeling along the wall like he was searching for something. I backed out of the bathroom slowly and pulled the door shut. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone to call the police. As I waited for them to arrive, I could still hear his muffled voice through the door, rising and falling in a fevered monologue. The cops showed up about 10 minutes later. I led them to the bathroom and explained the situation. They entered cautiously, hands on their weapons. I hung back, not wanting to see what happened next. There was some shouting, a scuffle. Then they emerged, the man between them. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. His eyes darted around wildly as they led him out. Just before they got to the exit, he locked eyes with me. The intensity of his gaze froze me in place. "You'll see," he said. "Soon you'll understand. They're coming for all of us." Then he was gone. One of the officers stayed behind to take my statement. He told me they suspected mental health issues, possibly drug-induced psychosis. They'd take him to the hospital for evaluation. After they left, I stood there for a long time, staring at the bathroom door. The diner felt different somehow, like the air itself had changed. I kept replaying the man's words in my head, feeling a creeping unease. I didn't sleep well that night when I got home. Every noise made me jump. I kept thinking I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. The next day, I went to my boss and insisted we install better security cameras and change the locks. I started checking the bathrooms obsessively during my shifts, always half expecting to find someone hiding there. It's been a week now, and I still can't shake the feeling that something's not right. I find myself looking over my shoulder constantly, wondering if there's some truth to what that man was saying. Are we really being watched? Is there something out there, hiding just beyond what we can see? I know it sounds crazy. The rational part of my brain says it was just a random encounter with a disturbed individual, but another part of me can't let it go. His eyes were so certain, so afraid. What if he really did know something? I'm writing this down partly to try and process it all, partly because I'm scared I might be starting to lose it a little myself. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? Am I overreacting, or should I be worried? Sometimes at night, when the diner is empty and quiet, I swear I can still hear his voice, whispering from the shadows. They're coming. They're always coming. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe at work again. Every customer that comes in, I find myself wondering, are they one of them? Am I being paranoid, or just finally waking up to a truth I've been blind to all along? I keep telling myself it'll get better with time, that eventually this will just become another weird story from the night shift. But deep down, I'm not so sure. Something changed that night. I changed, and I can't shake the feeling that it's only the beginning.